Let's explore this a little more now and talk about how urban farms can contribute to sustainable future cities. And we're joined by futurist Anders Sörman-Nilsson. Anders, good to see you.
Good to be here.
So you take a look at that example. It looks so obvious, doesn't it? You have these rooftops in a city. Why aren't we utilising them?
Yeah, it can either be used, of course, for traditional, sort of traditional horizontal farming, but of course we also have all these vertical options beyond what we've just heard about here in Redfern as well. And in fact, the production capability of these farms is much higher potentially than traditional horizontal broadacre farming.
Why is that?
So what we're seeing at the moment is that increasingly agriculture is just becoming science, or ag tech companies like Plenty out of the United States, for example, they reckon that in their indoor local farming factories, as it were, in cities that they're launching around the world, they need 1% of the amount of water for that you compare with a horizontal broadacre farming, with 350 times the output, because you're able to precisely give the right nutrients, the right water, and create the microclimates that the herbs or the vegetables need.
And the water actually just drips down, doesn't it, in those vertical farms?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's less water loss to, for example, evaporation, etc.
So ideally, how would this be set up? And we see some rather large examples here. But do you envisage that individuals would do this, whether they're living in apartments or houses, or would it be a community concept?
Well, I think, we all enjoy this sort of urban hipster, grow your own vegetables on your balcony. Certainly us in Surrey Hills, we do it ourselves as a family. We think it's a great way to involve the kids. Are we self-sufficient yet? No. This needs scale, and this is why I think the entrepreneurs behind this idea in Redfern, for example, they say, hey, it's about the workshops and it's about the community engagement. These things still need scale, and that's why you need to also professionalise these things beyond the community initiatives.
Well, presumably then that would mean that you'd need to get architects and planners on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Plenty, for example, see is that they're a replacement for the agricultural supply chain as it's currently existing. For example, I was in the United States last week, and there the average item on my plate in a restaurant has travelled 1,500 miles to get there. Plenty and the likes of these ag tech startups are now believing that you can create essentially a 100-mile diet where all the production of food happens locally within your city.
For a lot of people, price would be a really big factor, and they would also not necessarily want to eat what's seasonal. They like their particular vegetables and they want to go with those even when they're not in season. So do we also need to educate the public in terms of being more adaptable and taking what's in season?
Yeah, I think we've been very, very spoilt in Australia with produce that's really not native to this nation. You have great chefs, the likes of Kylie Kwong, for example, who are big fans of, say, the salt bush and using indigenous plants that are, of course, drought resistant and much better suited to this climate. Of course, with the global supply chain, we've all been spoilt with the level of choice we have available, and consumers have to be educated about what's sustainable in terms of choices.
What difference can blockchain make in this space? We know that it's already being used to verify where your fish has come from and to hold fisheries accountable in terms of them saying this fish is from these particular waters and it hasn't been farmed or it has been farmed, that kind of thing. Is that the future?
I think it's very, very important. I mean, already we have this trend around the world, right? It's farm to table, for example. But it's not just about great storytelling from the best chefs around the world about your beef that comes from Tasmania, for example. Increasingly, the consumer now also wants that story told in a digitally verifiable way, which is why blockchain is so important. In fact, now you even have nanotechnologies that you can spray onto beef to make sure that the beef is where it comes from. And this is, of course, important in terms of food security, in terms of the global supply chain as well, where you have so much counterfeit food. For example, in China, it's estimated that 50% of all Aussie wines are counterfeit. Now, if you want to drink the proper wine, then you probably want it to be verified on the blockchain, for example.
So sorry, go on.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of blockchain, whether it's cost effective because it's so energy intensive.
Well, of course, you have miners around the world using a bunch of electricity, etc. So you'd have to look at, on that on a case-by-case basis. But in terms of the environmentalism, I think people are very much prepared, particularly in places like China, to pay a little bit of a premium for their food if they know that it's digitally verifiable. For example, we had the scandal a few years ago when baby formula was found to have been tampered with and all sorts of chemicals was found in it. So I think you have to look at, where we also source the energy for the blockchain from in the future, make sure that maybe we increasingly use renewable energies to power that power supply.
So as far as the sustainable food production is concerned, is this being driven from a community level and I guess also as far as the corporates are concerned? Dare I ask this, on the eve of an election, are you seeing any political leadership?
Very little. I think when it comes to sustainability and technology innovation, as a futurist, I find very much the current political debate underwhelming, and I think a lot of people in the entrepreneurial space in Australia would say the same. I think both the major parties in some ways are shying away from the sort of innovation narrative that we heard only a few years ago, and that's very, very dangerous. So in that regard, I also encourage and I want to hear more of these sort of initiatives of investments in research and development. I think Labor are the only ones that are sort of pushing the agenda to get Australia back to an OECD competitive status when it comes to investments in our future.
Okay, so not so excited as far as food production is concerned, although obviously I'm talking politically, but we've had a lot of talk politically in regards to the future of transport within cities, obviously, as far as electric cars, to a lesser extent hydrogen, are concerned. Do you feel as though that debate is going in the right direction?
Well, again, I mean, there are examples on the ground of Australia creating smart cities. For example, we spend our weekends up at Pittwater, for example. We have a little weekend at Mackerel Beach. And this morning we had to commute using our car, which is part of course, the traffic environment. I always remind my fiancée that that's not the traffic, we are the traffic, which oftentimes we as commuters forget. But there's a great initiative at the moment. I had to drive her in because she had food poisoning, sadly. We should have checked on the blockchain whether the oyster she ate on the weekend was safe or not. But there's a great initiative on the northern beaches at the moment, which are really part of a Smart Cities initiative. And it's a public-private partnership between the Beeline, Keolis, Via, which is an app, of course, as well as with GoGet, which is a car sharing scheme. 100,000 members, 3,000 cars in Australia being used. This takes massive amounts of cars off the road. And the way that this initiative works, and it's got a satisfaction rating of 98% of people on the far northern beaches, is that you simply use an app like you would with Uber, for example, to get to the Beeline. So you get to still use the rapid transport system, the public transport system, but it solves the last mile problem, which for previous generations, you'd have to take a car or find another mode of transport to get to, say, Mona Vale or Narrabeen. But this is a really heartening example of how Australia is actually starting to use new consumer technologies, like we've all been educated to use Uber, from the private world into a public context as well.
But these are proven to work in high-density countries such as those in Europe. Isn't the problem here that the distances are so vast? I mean, yes, you can talk about the large cities, but once you're out of those 2 or 3 very large urban centres, then you run into difficulties, don't you?
Yeah, and this has been one of the changes or challenges for the likes of Tesla, for example. By the way, I should just say that, electric vehicle sales in Australia are woefully low still. 0.6% is the estimate for last year. In Norway, it's 50% of the last few months. So we're still laggards when it comes to new technologies. And one of the biggest challenges for Australian adoption, of course, is this tyranny of distance. We get worried, not just when our iPhone battery is about to run low, but we get very, very worried when our Tesla batteries start running low and where the next supercharger station is going to be. And of course, with the tyranny of distance, this is a major factor to the uptake, or the low uptake, of electric vehicles.
Yeah, because it's for regional areas. It's all very well for us in the cities to say, oh, these are great ideas. That's fantastic. There's a supercharging station a couple of kilometres away and we can park it there, go and do our grocery shopping, come back and the car's fully charged. But in regional areas, that's just not the case.
Well, and the same applies to ride-sharing services too, of course. It's a problem in those regional areas.
It can be a challenge, and of course one of the challenges is where we source the power from. So if we think about today, if we think about coal, for example, still powering a lot of these, and even the fact that we have dirty technologies powering some of these very sustainable technologies, that's an issue in and of itself. But we can also imagine a day in the future where everybody's home is now a supercharger station, for example. If we put more solar on our roofs, for example, you might no longer need a supercharger station. You just stop for a friendly cup of coffee on your way up to Byron Bay, for example, and meet one of the locals. Just like we share on Airbnb, we can now supercharge in someone's solar-powered backyard as well.
And it's Sörman-Nilsson. Thanks for joining us.
See you in the future.
Love that.